Hi, everybody. Greetings. Thank you very much to that wonderful response we had to that request for questions. There were far more questions than we've got time to answer tonight. But we've just taken a few in no particular order and almost at random, as it were. I just need to say, though, that in answer to these matters that you've raised, I can only give you my experiences. And what is true for me might not necessarily be true for any other members of the security forces or for members in other regiments. The Rhodesian Army, yes, was a very small army, comparatively speaking, but within that army there were many varied and different roles. So I just trust that you would just bear that in mind. So let's not waste any further time, shall we? Let's get stuck straight into these questions. Was there any Rhodesian-made cologne perfume brands? What were the most sought-after bits of kit among the soldiers? Personal hygiene things like soaps, lotions or powders? I don't think I'm the guy to answer these questions. Look, the Rhodesian industry was pretty advanced for its time. And I would be very surprised to hear that there was nobody manufacturing colognes or deodorants or perfumes. I'm sure that was the case. I just can't put any brand names to any manufacturers. There's nothing that I can recall, really. But with respect to soldiering, you know, as a territorial soldier, and I've said this before, you spend a certain amount of time in the bush and you spend a certain amount of time, shall we say, at home, where you work and you get on with your civilian life. But while you're there, living as a civilian, it seems as though your senses become dulled, blunted, if I can put it that way. But once you're in the bush, after a few days, for example, I would notice that my sense of smell became more acute. Now, you're up against an enemy who's probably grown up in the rural area and who can distinguish smells. Any odors that he detects in the bush, he understands and he knows what the source of it is. So if you go out on patrol and you've been using a lovely peppermint tasting toothpaste, and you can be sure that the breeze will carry that down through the trees, through the grass, into the nostrils of your enemy if he's close enough, and he will know exactly what he's smelling and what the cause of it is. So you could lose your life just through that, or the lives of your buddies. So you don't want to do that. You want to blend in with nature. And nature, the bush in Africa, with respect to human beings, is the smell of unwashed bodies. And the Rhodesian soldiers that you see on the images and the pictures and in the movies that are out in the bush, and let me tell you, that's how they smell. So, yeah, colognes, perfumes, powders, lotions, all that kind of stuff. You leave it in your trunk, you use that another day, or you leave it at home. The bush is no place for that sort of thing. I want to know what physical training was like, both in basic training and in garrison. Looking back at my time as a territorial soldier in the Rhodesian Army, I have to say that the greater bulk of our physical training involved running. That seemed to be the Army's idea of keeping us fit. When you're first called up, you go to a place called Llewellyn Barracks, and those people who have been there will all agree with me that you were doubled every day of your time there. There was official periods of PT, and if I can remember now, it would involve what they call chinning the bar, the usual kind of push-ups. We had rope climbing as well. I think you had to climb up something like 3 or 4 meters, and then 4 meters along a rope, and then 4 meters down, and you had a certain period of time to do that. There was an assault course that wasn't often used, perhaps twice maybe in the 4.5 months that I spent there, but certainly running, a lot of running. And this continued after you left there. Once you were posted to an operational battalion, when you are called up and you report for duty, there be 3 or 4 days of pre-mobilization training, as they called it, where they just prepare you and get you ready for the bush. And again there, PT involved mostly running. They also had what they called rifle strengthening exercises. And so, you'd be paraded as a squad, and an instructor would stand there, and you'd have your R1, and you'd have it at your side, and you'd raise it up like this and above your head, and so you do that kind of thing to strengthen your upper body, using your weapon. And again, there'd also be press-ups, but not that many, bunny hops, as we call them, but mostly, I would say, running. But even that started becoming less and less of a consideration as the war went on. More and more time was spent on weapon training and on the tactical things that any combat soldier needs to know. You were expected to keep yourself fit. I mean, the attitude was, you guys get called up every 6 weeks. You know what's waiting for you. You get yourselves fit. It's in your own interest to do that. And so I would run every morning and every evening, about 5 kilometers, rain or shine. I would do that. Every weekend I would try and get in perhaps a 20-kilometer walk. And so by the time that I would report for duty, I would be reasonably fit. And of course, once you're past that pre-mobilization training stage and you're now actually in the bush on operations, I mean, it is so strenuous that it just keeps you fit, without you having to do any PT. So I'm afraid that's about all that I can say by way of observation on physical training, except to emphasize again that the focus was on running. Was Israel seen as an ally? I read that they were one of the few countries to supply Rhodesia. Yes, we certainly regarded Israel as an ally. No question about that. That's not to say that I ever saw anything that we used in the army that was marked made in Israel. That's not the case. I think this is only my opinion. I think their greatest contribution was in technology. A man from the Rhodesian Air Force told me that the reason why they could keep flying those Hawker Hunters was because they kept getting upgrades from Israel. Now, I don't know whether there were Israeli technicians that came across to install all these modifications, or whether it was something that we did ourselves. But certainly the technology was state of the art, so I was told, for that time. And it all came from Israel. So yes, Israel certainly was an ally of ours. How dangerous was it for the African members of the Rhodesian security forces? What was the relationship between white and black soldiers in the Rhodesian army? Well, yes, of course, it was dangerous for every member of the security forces, whether you were European or whether you were a non-European soldier. We all faced the same danger out in the field. But I think that with our African troops, they had an added danger that we as Europeans were not exposed to. And this was not so much when we were in the bush. This would be when we were away from the bush. You know, when my call-up was over as a territorial soldier, I could go home, go back to work, get on with my life until I was called up again. And many soldiers faced that kind of a life. But with an African, they would be on leave and they would go home to the tribal trust land, to a village perhaps. And, you know, that must have been quite a scary thing for them all. Because if they fell into the hands of terrorists out in the rural areas, they could expect a very painful and lingering death. And I have spoken about this in one of my previous videos where I followed up the spoor which led me to the body of a dead policeman, a black man who had been on leave, and somebody in the village had betrayed him to the Gooks, and they made an example of him. And this kind of thing happened more often than we would like to think. So yes, in a sense, it was an added danger for the non-European soldier. And as for the second part of the question, how did the blacks and the whites get on in the army? Well, we got on perfectly all right, I must say. I can't tell you that there was friction or difficulties. I mean, the last call-up I did with 5RR, in fact, the last few call-ups I did with 5RR, I would be, you know, the stick leader, the section commander, if you like, and the stick would be 4 men, because the helicopter would take 4 men, and so we were broken up into little units like that. And it would be myself. I'd be the only European. I'd have a black MAG gunner and 2 black trackers with me. And it never occurred to me at any point that I was in danger from these people. In fact, we all relied on each other. They relied on my leadership and I relied on them for support. And we had no problems at all. Perhaps I could just comment, you know. It was, you know, we were an all-white unit at one time. And, you know, you have a certain culture and you're all used to each other and you understand each other perfectly well, even though you might be strangers. But when they introduced black troops to us, it was a little bit, you know, we had to adjust ourselves a bit. And we had in our section an African man by the name of Patrick. Now Patrick, I think, had a good heart, and I think he tried to be a good soldier. But I don't know. Patrick always seemed to me to be a square peg in a round hole. It's as though he just didn't fit in there, and he was forever in trouble for doing things that, you know, you wouldn't imagine a sane, rational person would do. Well, anyway, we're on a follow-up on one occasion, all right, and there's 2 sections. Myself in charge. I have another section with me in support, and I have an American MAG gunner, and I've spoken about this man as well in previous videos. Excellent man, credit to his country. Often think about him. I wonder what's happened to him. A very good man. I have only the best memories of this fellow. Solid, and we had Patrick. So we're getting close to the Gooks, and we sight them eventually. And Patrick takes it upon himself at long range to initiate the contact without anybody telling him to, particularly me. I mean, that's my job. And Patrick blazes away. And of course the Gooks cap it. And, you know, to cut a long story short, there's no casualties on either side. And now we want to leave the contact area. Gooks have gone over a river and they're gone. So then we discover that Patrick has dumped the shock pack. Now this is a sort of a medical pack with, very important stuff in it, So, where is it, Patrick? No, he took it off when we were following the gooks. Why? No, because it was too heavy. How can you do that? So now we had to go back and look for the shock pack. And the MAG gunner was not impressed. Now he was walking in front, and Patrick was behind him, and I was behind Patrick, and the rest of the men were behind me. So we're walking along a little pathway that we found, which be a little bit of a shortcut to get us to the point where we first started following these gooks. And then now we're going to just go out in an extended line and see if we can find the shock pack. So the MAG gunner passes some remark over his shoulder, which Patrick doesn't like. And he answers back. And the line stops. So I said, come on guys, keep moving. And the MAG gunner says to Patrick, what did you say to me? And Patrick repeats it. So before I can intervene, Patrick raises his weapon, and it looks like he wants to point it at the MAG gunner. And I look at Patrick's face, and the man is absolutely, he's like out of control emotionally. He's so angry. I didn't hear exactly what was said to him. And I just see the MAG muzzle just moving ever so slightly toward Patrick's chest. And the American says, go for it, have a try. And I think, oh no, there's going to be blood here any minute, and I'm going to be in trouble for this. So I jump in between the two of them. I said, right, stop it, guys. And I separated them, as it were. You go walk at the back, you walk in the front, and we continued. Now, that is the only incident that I can tell you from my experience where there was a conflict between black and white. But in all honesty, it wasn't a racial thing. I mean, the American was a very experienced man. He'd come to us from Vietnam, and he was a quiet guy. And as I said, he knew his stuff. He was really a good soldier. And I don't think that he, in his mind, saw Patrick as anything except inefficient and a hindrance to us. And if it had been a European guy that had done the same thing, started a contact without being told to at such long range, and then to have dumped his kit, I think that American would have made the same comments. So I don't think it was a racial thing. Yeah, Patrick worried me a lot, The last time I saw him, I don't know where we were. I think we may have been at a place called Mudzi, and there was a police station there, and they had a sort of fenced off area with kennels where they kept their dogs. And lo and behold, who should I see locked up inside this enclosed area? None other than Patrick. And I went over to him. What are you doing, Patrick? What? He said, oh, they put me here. Why? And he just looked down on the ground, and sort of shook his head. Didn't give me an explanation. But I gathered he'd been in trouble again. This question of dumping kit, is, in fairness to him, this is something that came up from time to time. And we were told, not ordered or anything like that, but we were advised, when you see a contact is imminent, don't go in there carrying the kitchen sink, as it were, on your back. Get rid of all the weight, and you can come back and fetch it later. And we were told that this is how the regular units operated. But I never liked that idea, because you don't know what's going to happen in a contact, and you don't know what's going to happen afterwards. There's no guarantee that you'll ever have the opportunity to retrace your steps. So I never did that. But I never carried a lot of kit on me, I must say. I went as light as possible. But even so, there's not one item that I would have dumped in the bush just because I was close to a group of tours. But Patrick was from RAR, and, it may have been something that he learnt there, that they said to him. But anyway, other than that, I can't honestly tell you that it was difficult working with them. No, we got on all right. I mean, we were all in the same boat, as it were, facing facing these gooks, and we looked after each other. Did you feel your superiors in the Rhodesian army were competent, including all the way to the top? Mr. Basil Panis. Sir, we have never met, but I know that name. It was mentioned to me in the most complimentary terms, Umtali 1962. I don't know if you are the same man, but in any case, thank you very much for the question. Yes, I think if we look at the regular army, there can be no doubt that the officer corps was excellent, really top-class men. I don't think one needs to add anything more to that. Professional, competent soldiers, right the way to the top. The territorial army, though, one has to bear in mind, was a conscripted army. So you would have men who were very competent, who were as good as the professional soldiers in many ways, who were passionate about fighting for their country and protecting their loved ones. Yes, you would have a strong element like that. But you would also have people who would find that the army wasn't their cup of tea. It wasn't something that they wanted. It wasn't something that they enjoyed. And they were forced to come along. So that I can understand, as anybody can. But what is hard for me to understand is how that some of these people ended up as officers, because they most certainly did. And I can remember hearing one of them. He wasn't connected with our platoon at all, but he was certainly a part of our company, talking to the men one evening, and really it was all negativity. And I had to speak to my own guys afterwards and say, listen, don't listen to that man. He's he's a problem. He shouldn't be having the position that he holds, because he's just undermining everything. Don't pay attention to him. So one came across people like that. But for myself, my own platoon commander, excellent guy, really, and the company commander, equally so. Yes, I regarded them as highly competent, although they were part-time soldiers. Nevertheless, they knew what they were doing, and they were very good at it. And I had the utmost confidence in them. On one call-up, my platoon commander wasn't there, and we had a new officer, but he was only with us for a little while, and then somebody more familiar to us came and took his place. But this chap, he was a lieutenant, and you know, he troubled me because, you know, we were a follow-up stick, and he never really used us as such. We seemed to be constantly doing resupplies. If you know, an observation post on top of a hill had to be resupplied with rations and water and so on, he would send us. And this caused a bit of frustration with me, because we were being used on tasks that we weren't intended for. But on one operation, we were taken to a very large protected village, and we had to set up an ambush on the side of this village during the night. And this lieutenant was with us. So we duly set up this ambush. Now, the law said that after darkness, nobody was allowed to move around. Not even livestock, nothing moves. So if you hear a sound at night, you just blaze away at it. It's not supposed to be anything making sounds at night. So we're lying there in ambush, and we hear somebody coming. And you know, we all get ready to open fire. And then I hear the voice of the lieutenant saying, "Stop there." And, in the darkness, this just rang out. And I just froze. I thought, what's going on? And these figures stop. And he gets up and he walks over to them. You can see in the starlight. And he says, "Who are you and where are you going?" So they say, "Oh, we're sorry, we're going to such and such a village. But you're not supposed to move at night." "No, sorry, boss. Sorry, boss." So he says, "Okay, don't do it again." And he lets them go. And, I couldn't handle that. The next day I sulked the whole day, and he could see that I was keeping away from him and away from the other guys, and I just wouldn't have anything to do with anybody. I was so upset about that. I mean, these laws are there for a reason. And, the gooks will sometimes push locals ahead of them in case there is an ambush, So he stands up and he says, "Who are you and where are you going?" There could have been a bunch of gooks behind them that have just vanished and melted into the bush. And what are we doing there, setting up an ambush, if this guy's going to do that? So he comes across to me and he says, "Aren't you glad that we never killed those men?" So I just look at him and I don't answer. And okay, he leaves me alone. And as I said, afterwards he went off. I don't know where he went to, and we got back another lieutenant whom we had worked with before, and who was also a good man. And today, all these years later, it's still something I think about. And I think we should have opened up on them. Although I know now, in retrospect, that those were civilians. But I'm sure he's very happy, looking back on that night, that he did what he did. And he's probably thinking, well, at least I never killed anybody that was innocent. But it's still I'm betwixt and between, I'm in some ways I think we did the wrong thing. In other ways, I don't know. It's just one of those things that sort of hangs on in your mind as the years go by. And now and then, in my more reflective moments, I will think of that and wonder about it, and wonder about my own attitude to life as well. So, yeah, those were the kind of officers we had. We had good ones, and we had some, in my opinion, that were perhaps not so good. But I think that is typical of any conscripted army. What was the general view of the Rhodesian security forces amongst rural farmers? I have to say, I have only the greatest admiration and respect for the Rhodesian farmers. They are, to my mind, the unsung heroes of the Rhodesian Bush War, and I'm sure a great many people would agree with me on that point. But the question wasn't what did we think of the farmers. We held them in very high esteem. I think I made that clear. But rather, what did the farmers think of us? Well, I would like to say to you that they, held us in equally high regard, but I'm not so sure. There was a group of gooks that were moving along a ridge between two hills, and somebody had seen them. So a group of farmers who were police reservists were called up very hurriedly, and there was an internal affairs group of men also that were hurriedly thrown together into this follow-up, and one section from 5RR, and they set off after these terrorists. But as they were climbing this feature to get up onto the ridge, one of the internal affairs men accidentally discharged his weapon, and this alerted the gooks. So they set up an ambush. And when these farmers and internal affairs men and 5RR guys walked along the ridge and approached the end of it, they came under unexpectedly heavy fire, and it was a big contact. It was I was nearby and I heard it, and we were sent there to try and reinforce the Rhodesian security forces that were there. But we arrived too late. The contact was over. But I could see that, man, there were dead gooks lying around everywhere in the grass. And unfortunately, we lost a few men. And amongst them was one of the soldiers from 5RR. So it was late in the evening, and we slept there that night. And the next morning, I took the dead soldier's R1, because I had been carrying a shotgun up until that point, and I had decided that I would leave the shotgun and rather, take the R1. So we set off at first light with some of these farmer policemen to follow up the spoor. But I mean, the gooks had been gone for a while now. The contact must have taken place about 5 in the evening, and now it was like 13 hours later, and when we started on the spoor. So the chances of catching them were very slim. And of course, these gooks were moving. I mean, they just had an awful punch up, lost a lot of their men, and so they were anxious to get away from the scene as quickly as possible. Anyway, we set off down this feature, very steep sided hill, with lots of sort of outcrops of granite. And we moving down, following some spoor, and then all of a sudden, about halfway down this hill, there's this commotion, and I look to my left, and what do I see but one of these policemen tumbling down. I mean, he's like doing cartwheels, almost using his R1 as a like a pole vault, and of course he came crashing against one of these granite rocks, and he lay there. Now, whoever was in charge of them ran over there, and a couple of other guys, to see to him, and then he beckoned me over, and I went there, and he said, "Look, he's a bit wounded and stunned. Can we just pause for a few minutes and just let him get his breath?" So I said, "Is he okay?" He said, "No, he's fine. Can we just take 5?" So I said, "Okay." So we sit down and we wait, and we wait and we wait and we wait, and then eventually this man gets groggily to his feet, and we proceed down the hill. When we get to the bottom of the hill, I see the spoor is now going to go off to the right, and it looks like good spoor that we can still follow. And then this chap comes over to me again, and he says, "Listen, can we just stop again? He's okay, but just give him a few more moments. Let him just." So I said, "Oh, okay, all right." And then I noticed that the inside of my arm is like covered in mud, and I thought, "What is this?" And I pick away at it, and it comes off. And then I see that the R1 is also covered in it, and my hands and everything. And it was blood. So I was actually surprised. I hadn't noticed it before, but now that the sun was up properly, I could see it. So there was a little bit of a stream there, and I crouched there. I thought, well, while I'm waiting for this man to finally catch his breath, I'll just swab this off me. So I'm crouching there, and I'm washing this off my arm, and getting it as much as I can off the weapon. Not that it bothered me, but I mean, I wouldn't have worried if we were walking on the spoor and get cleaned up later on. But when that was done, I see, but we're still sitting. Now I'm getting a bit impatient now, so I walk over to the policeman in charge, and I said, "Is he okay? Do you want me to phone for a casevac?" "No," he says, no, we don't need to casevac him. He's okay. We can." And with that, the man gets to his feet. So now we start the follow-up again. Goodness gracious, I don't think we've gone a half an hour when this man beckons me over again and he says, listen, can we just stop for a moment? I said, is he in trouble? No, it's not him, man. But, the guys haven't had a break. They were on the spoor since yesterday morning. And can we just stop just for a second? Guys just need a smoke break. Okay. Then the next thing I hear, the hiss of gas burners, and out comes, this whole thing of making tea in the bush. It's like a ritual, The gas burner's got to be lit up. The mug has got to be taken out of its pouch, cleaned up as best as you can. Water needs to be poured into it. It's got to boil, and then the tea bags are put in, and then that's taken out, and then the milk and the sugar is added, and it's stirred, and it's shared out amongst. And time goes by, and nobody gulps it down. They all sit down with their backs to a tree or a rock, and they contentedly sip away at this boiling hot liquid until it's finally all gone. And now it's time for a smoke, and then after a smoke we get going again. And time is passing, and my Shangans are looking at me, and they're shaking their heads. And one of them's even got up, and he's standing there, above the spoor, and he wants to get going. So they pick up the vibes, and eventually we get to our feet and we walk again. And this process continues up until lunchtime, where now we got to stop for lunch. And it must have been about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I am so frustrated, but the guy comes up to me and he says, listen, can you just tell me in all honesty, are we likely to make contact with these people? Because, my guys are tired and they've been on this since yesterday morning, and they'd like to get home, and they've been away for one night and now another night. So I said, no, okay, you guys, if you've had enough, let's call it off. So that's the end of the follow-up. Now, I'm not complaining, and I'm not complaining too much at the time either, because they've had a very good punch-up, and I mean they've done well for themselves. One of them actually, a personal kill, got 2 gooks. One of them stood up while the firing was going on, they tell me, just calmly took aim, just ignored the bullets flying around him. Bang, one guy gone. Bang, the other guy gone. So, I'm not about to give them an awful hard time. Anyway, the follow-up's over. In any case, I can see that the gooks they haven't stopped to rest or anything. They're going, man. They're gone. But the story doesn't end there. A couple of weeks later, platoon commander comes back from a meeting that was held between the security forces and a representative group of farmers. So he says, Martin, there was a little bit of trouble in the meeting. Oh, really? Yeah. They were complaining about the army. Now, these farmers were getting knocked. I tell you, one night, it was like, I don't know, Dunkirk. The whole sky was just lit up. It seemed like the gooks had got together somewhere and decided that they were all going to knock farms that night, because you could see on the horizon and you could hear it. There was a farm being attacked. There was another farm being attacked. There's another farm being attacked. Now, it was in that sort of a situation, in that environment, it was so bad that our company commander actually took everybody off patrol and put men on each farm as protection. So, of course, this meeting took place, and there was some harsh things said, according to the platoon commander. And amongst the things that was said was that the army is losing spoor deliberately. So I listened to this and I think, yeah, that's a pretty bad indictment. But then I think a little bit more. Now, hang on a minute. There's only our platoon in this area, and our platoon only has 2 tracker call signs, and the other one, as far as I know, has never gone on any follow-up with farmers. So they must be talking about me. Oh, when I saw red, I was so angry. And even now, my blood still boils a little bit. I was so indignant and insulted. And I swore then boy, if I ever get the chance to go on a follow-up with those guys again, they'll desert me, but I will not stop. I'll walk them into the ground. You know, and what makes me... That was a very unfair comment, because, I mean, they knew, whoever it was that stood up there and made that observation must have been there on that follow-up. And they knew the circumstances why that was abandoned. They were the cause of it, not the army. And apart from that, you know, farmers generally are pretty good trackers. Not far from here. In fact, if I was to take you outside this factory, I could point you in the direction where the late great Des Frost had a small holding. He's better known as the chairman of the Rhodesia Front Party. Well, he came down here, and he and I became very good friends. Now, he had a dairy farm there on the small holding, and the locals here, who don't know about Rhodesians, came one night and stole some of his livestock. Well, he and his son set off at first light after these guys, and before they knew what had happened, Des and his son was in amongst them, and they took to their heels. So he was able to recover his dairy cows. But it goes to show what a good tracker he was. And these guys are now with me on a follow-up. I'm not walking on the spoor, nor the Shongans, nor is the MAG gunner. And they're following behind me, and they can see the spoor as clearly as I can, and they can see that nobody's abandoned it, because when we stopped there, we still had spoor. Oh, yeah. I don't think that all the farmers regarded us very highly. And, you know, it's just something that sticks in my mind. But I mean, never mind what they say. It's their actions that are important. And as we got to the end of the Rhodesian era, if I can put it that way, you know, our kit was in a sorry state. And the rations became less and less. At one time in my platoon, only those men who were on operations got ratbacks. The stuff wasn't as freely available as it was before. I can remember in the, I won't say the good old days, but in the earlier days of the war, when the call-up was over, how that, you know, big trenches were dug and all the unused food was just dumped in there. Lots of it, whatever the guys didn't want to put in their kit bags and take home. Those days were gone. And when the hard times came, it was the farmers who looked after us. They would come with vegetables and food, and it was very, very happily received by us, very gratefully so. So I shouldn't perhaps listen to maybe one hothead who said that in a meeting, but rather think of the many times that the farmers were so good to us. Yes, no, I have the greatest admiration for them. I say that unreservedly, and I don't need to qualify that. Really, they were very good people. Do you know anyone from Rhodesia that pursued mercenary work after the war? I would just like to know what you think about my call. I can't say for certain that I knew anybody that went on from the Rhodesian Bush War to join a mercenary group. Yes, I heard stories that our very own company commander had joined a mercenary group, but that was never confirmed. Mike Hall, yes, I never met the man, but I nearly did. What had happened was that we had a boy at school by the name of Colin, a really nice guy, you know, one of these chaps that was an all-rounder, good at everything, and you know, every boy admired him. You know, we all kind of thought, well, we would like to be like Colin. And I would have thought that this man would have gone on and become a, you know, successful banker or a lawyer or a professional man of some sort. But to my amazement, I heard that he had gone and joined up with Mike Orr's mercenaries and had gone off to the Congo. And that seemed so out of character. But tragically, a few weeks later, we heard that he'd been killed there. And this rather shook the neighborhood. It was the last thing that we expected. I mean, this was a young man with a very promising future, and suddenly he was gone. And then I heard that Mike Hoare was at a home in Waterfalls, and I was given the address and told that he would be there until a certain date, and that he was recruiting mercenaries. And I wanted to go. And my father didn't have too much to say about it, but my mother, bearing in mind what had happened to Colin, was dead against it. And, you know, I had to yield in the end. I mean, it was just, it was a bad scene at home. So I never met Mike Hoare. But it was touch and go for a while. If the old lady hadn't complained so much, I think I would have gone over there to that house in Waterfalls and put my name down on the dotted line. But I met a number of people who had gone there. Some of them were school friends of mine. One man who had been in the same classroom as I was at high school. I knew him very well. He came back and he'd been badly wounded by a white phosphorus grenade. I don't know how this happened or what the circumstances were, but I remember going to visit him soon after he returned, and he lived with his father in a block of flats on 2nd Street Extension. And he, apart from his wounds that he was recovering from, he seemed cheerful and okay. And I wasn't there very long. We just exchanged a few words really, and I just made sure that he was all right, and so some sort of promise, yeah, well, I'll see you again soon, and it just never happened. And then I worked with a man who had also been a mercenary, and he was okay. You wouldn't think that he had this sort of career on his CV. Ken was a good man. But the others that I knew that came back, they had changed. So I think the Congo experience must have been something really terrible for most of them. They were hard, Look, the Rhodesian soldiers were also hard, but that was a hardness born of desperation, of fighting to protect what was yours and what you loved. But these mercenaries, these ex-mercenaries, they had a hardness that stemmed from, I got nothing more to lose in life. It was that kind of desperation. They didn't care about consequences anymore. And I found them to be people who had been affected so badly that they were nothing like the ones that I knew before they went. One of them was so badly disfigured, and he kept to himself really. I don't know that he had many friends. Now, he had been on the back of a truck, and a box of grenades started smoking, and he grabbed this and tried to throw it over the edge, and in doing so this lot exploded, and he was very badly injured. But Mike Hoare was good. He had him flown to France, and the best of medical attention was given to him there. They saved his life, and he came back. He came back to Zambia, and he got a job there. And then he just got a notice from the Zambian government, because they used to do that in those days, just unexpectedly. You'd be served a notice saying, you got 24 hours to get out of the country, you've been deported. And this happened for no rhyme or reason. It was as though they had to dispose of so many Europeans in a given period of time, and they just took names as if we were almost out of a hat, and bad luck for you if yours was chosen. So he was told to get out of the country. And he said, fine. And he tells me that what he did was he went down to the police station, walked around, and selected a Land Rover. Now, he had a Land Rover of his own back at his home. And, this is the gall of the man. Opened the bonnet, and I don't quite understand the technicalities of it, but he tells me that next to the voltage regulator was a spare fuse, and if you pull that out and you jam it in between two other fuses, you can actually start the vehicle without a key. So he did this, closed the bonnet, got into this vehicle, started it up, and drove it away from the police station. Drove it to his home, and that night started dismantling it. Took off all the police signs and everything else that identified it as a police vehicle, and drove it down to Chirundu the next day. Gave them a copy of his deportation notice, and they let him through with his vehicle. So he abandoned his Land Rover there in Zambia and came across the border, he said, with what was at that time almost a brand new vehicle. And so it kind of showed the mentality of these men. The other fellow that I remember, he never spoke about it, except on one occasion he spoke to me. Now, he was a man not given to exaggeration. I never ever caught him out in a lie or anything like that. What you saw is what you got with this man. Now, he was up there as a mercenary, and he had noticed, he told me, and he only spoke about this once, that there were two trucks, United Nations trucks, and I think, if I remember correctly, he told me they were Dodge trucks that would take supplies or something along a certain road, probably to a camp somewhere, and then they would return later on after they had been unladen. So he placed an obstruction in the road, and when these two vehicles came back on a certain day, they stopped, and both drivers got out to move this obstruction, and he killed both of them. Then he hid these vehicles in the bush, and when his contract was up, he went back over the border from Zambia with a friend of his, and they retrieved these vehicles, brought them into Zambia, and they sold them there. And of course they were cleaned up, all the UN signs were taken off and everything. And what amazed me about this story was that this man was so normal in every other way. And after he had said this to me and told me about this, I used to look at him at times, and I used to think, now I can understand how there are murderers in this world who, when they are caught, people who know them are amazed and say, but we saw no signs that this man was like this at all. And with this guy, you would never think that he was a cold-blooded killer. He was just such an ordinary, normal man. So, being a mercenary seemed to have different effects on different people. But as regards Mike Hoare, one and all said that he was a good man. The people were paid. I did not hear of any problems. They worked for a certain amount of money, and it was given to them when their contracts were up. He looked after them while they were working for him, and all in all, he seemed to have been a good leader. So unfortunately, that is all that I can really tell you about mercenaries, excepting in Rhodesian society, I think we thought well of them, and we had the impression that they did a lot of good in the Congo and that they saved a lot of lives there that would have been lost otherwise. So, all around, I think apart from a few incidents like I've mentioned to you, I think Mike Hall did a good job in the Congo. So hats off to him for that. Well, that I think that'll do for now. I feel like I've been moaning a little bit. I hope you'll forgive me. But anyway, folks, thank you very much again. And we'll get round to the other questions. Again, let me just say thank you for your support. It means a lot to me. I really appreciate that. So, folks, until we get round to the next set of questions, keep well, take care, stay safe, and God bless you. Bye for now.